Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2026 week 6. That is February 2nd through 8th, and I am just unboxing some parts just to kind of check them, make sure everything is as I expect. And so this is a Jezel shaft rocker sets. I spent a little bit extra money and got shaft rockers instead of getting, regular rockers with stud girdle and everything else. So I'm just going through all these parts, and what I'm realizing is I bought this kit, and the instructions online say it comes with specific parts, one of those parts being a push rod length checker, and I'm not finding it here. So I'm like, well, what the hell is going on? So I end up going back to the computer, and I'm looking, and I'm just going through every single part, make sure, check every single thing, whatever. Because I did not find the push rod length checker that I was expecting to have. So after going through all of this, there is one of these pieces had the instructions that it comes with, and what I ended up doing is I called Summit, who I bought them from, and I was like, hey, this says it's supposed to come with this. It didn't, what's going on? And they were like, yeah, it totally says it's supposed to come with it. And then I found the new instructions in the box, and the instructions have changed, and it no longer comes with that and a few other things. So that's super frustrating. So I called Jezel, and I was like, hey, this would happen. They're, oh yeah, it doesn't come with it. I'm like, well, your instructions on your site say that it does, and so I specifically didn't buy one because of that. And they're like, oh, well, if you were in the US, I would totally send you one, but because you're in Canada, no, I can't do it because of tariffs and, excuse. And I was like, okay, but, there's nothing you can do. Your website specifically said this, and the guy's like, oh, I'll talk to my manager and I'll call you back. I was like, cool. Yeah, that was like a week and a half ago, so I'm not expecting that phone call back. It's just frustrating because you do research, you look at parts, you do your best, and then, manufacturer just changes something out from under you without any, warning. But that's part of it. That's, building custom cars. Things do not go as planned. It is what it is. We'll move on. I'll have to buy a push rod checker. It's not the end of the world. They're not super expensive. So what we are going to do is we are going to continue on with electrical. So what I'm doing right there is I'm putting in some nutserts on the top, and I am getting it so that I can mount my EGT temp module. So my EGT temp module is going to sit there under the dash because all of the EGT probes are going to come through the firewall and then connect right up into that module. I was getting it mounted with 4 nutserts and then 4, I think that is 1/4 inch screws. I'm using 1/4 inch socket cap screws instead of bolts, but so one of those riv nuts was just a little bit out of, wasn't perfectly straight vertical, so just getting the hammer and kind of tweaking it a little bit. And then, after I was able to get the EGT module installed, and then we are just, continuing on with some electrical in the car. So while I was waiting for, I don't remember exactly what I was waiting for. Oh, right, I was waiting for the clear to cure on the roof. So while I'm waiting for the clear to fully cure, because, that'll take a few days, it's a little bit colder in the shop, I might as well do some work. So what I'm doing here is undoing a bunch of the zip ties that I had on this main harness bundle. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to take some of the wires out. The wires that I'm mainly concerned with taking out right now are the 5 coil wires. So there's an EST on that side. It's going to be, maybe see the, so that'll be EST, EFGH, and then EST ground. I'm going to depin them from the passenger side harness, the driver side harness. And then what I'm also going to end up doing is depinning the main engine harness bulkhead. So on the, I'm doing the driver's side right now. I'm getting those EST ones out. I'm getting the power for, and the power for the coils. So the EST trigger wires and then the power for the coils, what I got to pull out of there. And so those are all coming out right now. I had a hell of a time getting the coil power wire out. I think it's a 14 gauge wire, and I may have crimped it a little too much. Like I may have had it on the wrong setting, so it crimped it too deep and deformed the contact a little bit. But I was having no luck getting this thing out. I spent a long time, getting the 4 or 5 smaller EST wires, the trigger wires out. Cake, super easy. But yeah, getting the power wire out was really, really difficult and challenging, and I was getting really frustrated. It usually takes a fair amount to get me frustrated, but for whatever reason, this just triggered me. Maybe it's because I had difficulty pulling wires out and I broke one of these shells before. That might have something to do with it. Yeah, you can see I'm just struggling with this thing. Just taking way longer than it should. Still struggling with this thing. Still got the power wire in there, so I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna undo some of this tape and I'll come back to it. Just try and get my mind off of it, and hopefully when I come back to it I can actually get it. right, so after a super duper long struggle, finally got that out. So now I can start pulling those wires all the way back through. And of course, along the way, I added some other wires. So it's not just those 5 wires that are all taped together. There's actually some other wires. So I got to, kind of undo them all the way back and kind of figure that out and make it work type of thing. So yeah, as you're going to witness, I am going to undo a lot of electrical tape. I'm going to pull a lot of these wires back through the harness. And you may be asking yourself, Ben, why in the hell are you doing that? A couple of years ago, you spent hours doing this wiring. While you were doing this wiring, you thought to yourself, I'm never going to modify this harness. Well, you see, back then I was an idiot when I thought that. And I'm an idiot now because I'm changing stuff. But the main reason is I'm planning on changing where my coils live. So previously they were on the front frame rails, but now I'm planning on moving them to above the valve covers. By moving them above the valve covers, it's going to allow me to run shorter coil wires. But I think the install in general is just going to be cleaner. It'll still all fit under the hood, should still fit under the intake. And also where they were on the frame rail, when I was driving through water and stuff, they would consistently get, coated in water. So I just wanted to move them out of that area to the top of the engine. I think it's a better place for it. So because it's going to be sitting on top of the engine, I want all of the wires going into the engine and the engine bay going through that bulkhead connector on the firewall. So I'm going to move all of my coil wires from the 2 bulkheads on either fender well, and right all those straight up the engine harness. So that means I need to undo the coil wires and all the electrical tape that I use to tape the bundles to one another, all the way back. And then what I need to do is I'm going to redo the engine harness. Now the engine harness is all right. I've got all the wires tied up together and whatnot, but as you move the harness around, some of the wires pop out. And while I'm going to go to a more motorsport style harness, note, I know that it's not like a fully 100% like professional, race team wiring harness. I'm going to do it the best of my ability. It's my first time doing it, and I haven't really taken any courses or anything, so I'm not 100% sure on exactly what the best practices are. I'm just going to kind of do what makes sense to me and try and make the best of it. Man, just looking back through this, I remember spending so much time cutting electrical tape to the right length and wrapping this up, and spending so much time getting the wires bundled up just right. And now I'm just undoing it all, spending as much time undoing it as I did doing it. So yeah, as I mentioned, I am redoing the entire engine harness. In this engine harness, there were some wires I didn't need, and I need to put the EST or the coil wires through there. So I gotta undo it all, pull all the tape off, and then I'm gonna re-go through everything and just, I know for a fact there was a couple of wires I didn't need, but I'm just gonna go through it, make sure I got everything I need, add all of the wires that I do need, because I'm also adding another sensor input to that wiring harness. I'm gonna add a few spare inputs just, for future proofing. But I'm going to do a crankcase pressure sensor in there, so I need to make sure I've got an input for that. And, I'm going to go through, make sure I've got all the colors for all the wires noted. There were a couple of wires going there that I didn't know what they did. So when I was originally building the harness, I was looking at the wiring diagram for the ignition, and it's got stuff like, what is it? Bypass out, I think there's, and then there's one for spout, or maybe that's the same one. I think there was 2 wires that I had that would go to the ignition that I just don't need, because I got, all I'm using is the cam and the crank sensor, and then from there the computer controls the timing. So my distributor only had 4 wires, effectively cam, crank, ground, and power. So I didn't need those other wires. Those are for different ignitions. But when I first did this, I didn't know that. I learned after I got the ignition put together. And 2 of the other wires that I'm pulling out are the knock sensors. So I was like, oh, of course I want knock sensors, protect the engine. And then I realized through much research and much just going through folks who have done Holley. I bought a subscription for a course, Tune the Trilogy, and the guy who puts it on, Joe Simpson, showed why the Holley knock sensors aren't that great, and most people who are doing Holleys just don't even use them. So I'm going to pull all those wires out, pull out all the wires I'm not using, and then I'm going to add inputs, add a few spare inputs, reroute all the coil wires, redo the engine harness, and then I will end up repinning all of those wires. So fair amount of work. And yeah, so I'm just working through depinning everything, and now that I know that some of the bigger power wires are a pain, I had an easier time depinning this. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about the engine harness, so I'm just going to shut up and let you enjoy. So yeah, this is something that I do a lot, and that's, have my laptop while I'm wiring the car, because I'm reading schematics, I'm reading manufacturer's parts, all that type of stuff. And, I, just cross-referencing what I'm doing. I'm going to end up checking and figuring out which of the wires coming off of the engine harness are the crank and the cam signal, because I never actually marked that on the wire. So I'll actually get some heat shrink tubing, and I'll heat shrink the label onto it, and I'll do the same thing. I think I'm going to do the same thing for a lot more of the wires now. Just label them all so it's very clear where they go, what they do, even though I kind of know what they are and where they go and what they do. But it certainly doesn't hurt to have a little extra label on there. So yeah, so I'm just verifying a couple of the wires I didn't even use. I didn't even have them pinned out on the engine harness, so that tells me for sure I can pull them out. Yeah, so just going through this harness, pulling out the wires I don't need, making sure I have the wires that I do need connected, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm just kind of taping this off because I'm going to run the wires for the new inputs. And man, all of these wires just ended up becoming a massive mess. And it took me a while to get them all untangled. Longer than I thought it should have. But when you're dealing with wires and brand new wires, that's just the way it goes. You gotta, deal with the mess. Yeah, so there's a wire in this harness, and for some reason I thought this was my switch panel harness, but it's not. It's my dash lights slash module harness. But yeah, as I say, there's this wire, and I'm like, what the hell is it doing? Where's it going? I can't figure this out. I'm like, I don't know where this goes. What's it doing? Why is it here? And I eventually realized, oh, this is the wrong harness. So I actually went and I looked at my dash and traced the wires back, and I was like, oh, this powers, or it doesn't power, this goes to the module that feeds all my gauges. This is effectively like the CAN bus module for my gauges. So I was like, oh, I definitely need that. I cannot remove that, because my original plan was like, I don't need this wire. I'm just going to pull it out and remove it. Nope. Can't do that, you dumbass. Now that I know that wire is, I can go and I can start doing my engine harness. So I've got all of the the coil wires. Yes, I call them the EST wires because that's what it's labeled as in the instructions: EST A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, and then EST ground. But the reality is they're my coil trigger wires. So I've got those in the bundle already. They're the super long ones, going way farther than any of the other wires in the bundle. And then I also have the new wires for the inputs that I'm going to do. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start wiring some of these wires around themselves. I'm going to start with the ground and the coil wire. I'm just going to not necessarily weave them, but twist them together. And then I'll grab some of the other wires, twist them together, and then I'll twist those two bundles together, and then I'll grab some other wires, twist them the opposite direction, grab another bundle, twist them the opposite direction, twist those together in the opposite direction, and then twist those with the original bundle, and then just kind of resume that process until I have one big bundle that's got like a core of wires running one way, a core of wires running the other way, and hopefully that will work. I hope I don't have any issues with it. If I have issues with it, that's gonna really suck. But I won't know until, I get the engine in the car. The car will be painted by that point. And then hopefully the engine harness works. As I say, until I build the new engine, I won't know for sure. But this is what I'm doing. So I'm going to repeat this process for all of the harnesses I build in this video. So what I'll probably do is just talk about the harness as I start it, but that's about it. I am super happy with how this turned out. I mean, could I have done it better? Yes, but that would take a fair amount of learning. But I'm happy with how it turned out. So I'm just gonna lay it in the car, make sure it still goes up to that firewall. But yeah, I'm stoked. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start getting all of the wire loom and the heat shrink on this harness. I am not going to finish it off. I'm just going to put the heat shrink over the wires, put the wire loom over the wires, and I will wait to heat shrink it until I actually have all of the wires terminated and tested. Once I've terminated and tested them all through the connector, then I will actually finish off the heat shrink and all the heat shrink boots for final assembly. I didn't have any of the heat shrink on it before because I was like, I'll do that later. I guess in my mind, I always knew I was going to change my mind. I was just, procrastinating for the benefit of future Ben, which doesn't usually happen. Usually past Ben is an asshole to future Ben and really screws him around, but this time helped him out. So yeah, I'm just going to get wire loom on here and then get all of the heat shrink in the right places. Now that I have the engine harness done, it is time to glue the roof on. So I was torn. I was like, okay, what I can do is I can continue doing electrical, leave the roof, or I can stop doing electrical, which I really enjoy, and glue the roof on. And I was like, okay, just stop. Let's glue the roof on, because that's going to have to sit and cure, for at least a few days. So if I do that now, I can get that glued on. I can continue with the electrical work while the glue is setting. There's no reason why I can't. I just got to be careful not to, hit the roof, which I would be surprised if I did. And so, yeah. I don't know if you remember, but when I was putting some of the Clecos in before, there were some holes in some areas of the body, right where the Clecos were going to go. So what I'm going to end up doing is getting the welder out. I'll weld out those holes. There was also a cut in the driver's side A-pillar from when I was taking the roof off, so I got to weld that up. But yeah, so I'm just getting the roof out of the shop for the moment while I, get the rest of this stuff kind of prepped up. Clean up the shop a little bit. I feel a little bit claustrophobic in there. And then, yeah, I'm going to glue the roof on. So I got some more Clecos because I didn't have enough. So what I'm going to do is you're going to see I'm going to put the roof on. After I clean up all the metal, I got to take this right down to bare metal. So after I do that, after I weld up and grind the holes, I'm going to put the roof on. I'm going to put all of the Clecos that I already had back in. I'm going to drill out holes for the new ones. And then I'm going to pull the roof off, put the roof on that plywood that's sitting, where the engine bay is. And then what I will do is I will take some 3M panel bond, and I will put panel bond on both the roof and then on a good bit of the roof structure, or the car roof structure, where the roof is going to sit. I'm kind of going with a more is better approach. I'm going to add glue absolutely everywhere, in the hopes that it will touch the roof and bond to the roof. And likewise, I'm adding extra panel bond on the roof side. So I'm going to have panel bond on both sides so that I hopefully get a very good, tight, firm fit. And ideally, the best case scenario would be the roof where I'm bonding it to the car outlasts the car itself. Like, 1,000 years from now, if the only thing that was left was the panel bond on the roof and the metal, I would be happy with that. Because the last thing I want is this roof flying off as I'm going down the highway. That would not be good. So that's the more is better approach on the panel bond. So yeah, I'll put it on both sides, and then I will very carefully place the roof on top, and then I will reinstall Clecos all the way around. There's a few areas where I just didn't have enough Clecos, so I will just use regular C-clamps. And then I let it sit. After I read the instructions, I realized I need to let it sit for at least 7 or 8 days for it to cure fully at the temperature that my shop is. So a couple of times I'll go into the shop, when I'm working in there, and even though it's not that cold, I'm going to turn the propane heater on just to kick the temperature up in the shop a few degrees to, maybe help it cure a little bit better. The better the temperature, the stronger the cure. So the lower temperature, you still get like 2,800 psi of bonding force. But if you can get it up a little bit higher, which I don't quite get that high, you can get, I think, like 3,800 psi of bonding force. But as I say, I just want to make sure that I'm doing this all right. And then after I glue the roof on, I can very easily get back to electrical. I'm actually kind of liking having the camera up high on the bench like this, so that I can just move, from side to side on the car very easily without having to move the camera, move the camera, move the camera, camera's in the way. But the thing is, you lose some of the detail of what I'm doing. So I mean, you can see that I'm welding, but you may not be able to see exactly where I'm welding or exactly what I'm welding on. So there's pros and cons. And also this camera angle, it's tilted right now. I could, probably tilt it a little bit in the software, but it's just the way the camera ended up. So I'm kind of torn between doing some of these wider angles a little bit more, just because it's a little bit easier for me, and you actually get to see more. So you get to see, like, okay, I'm walking from here, I'm walking around, I'm going, I'm grabbing parts over here, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And when it's close up, when I leave the camera shot, I cut out a lot of that stuff. Like right here, if I was up close just on the left side, you never would have seen me walk around, go get that welding rod, come back around. So it's, pros and cons. I don't want a lot of dead air, especially if you're not seeing what I'm doing. But you kind of miss out on some of there's like macro and micro, and I don't know, you miss out on the bigger picture, quite literally, right? Like when I'm so close, you literally miss out on the bigger picture and some of the other things that I'm doing. So I don't know, I'll play with it a bit. While I've been building the car, so while I put suspension in, while I built the engine, I've done a lot of up close stuff. So maybe as I reassemble the car this time around, there's no reason why I can't, do it of a bit of a wider shot, so that you see a little bit more, and some of the things that I'm doing when I'm going to get tools, when I'm going to get parts, when I'm back and forth, up and down, back and forth, up and down. I don't know. We'll see. And I mean, if you got any thoughts, leave a comment. I'd like to hear other people's, thoughts and opinions. What I'm doing here is I'm just cleaning off all of the paint in the areas where I'm going to be putting this panel bond. The instructions are, direct to metal, don't put it on paint. So I'm just cleaning off all I had a bunch of overspray on the front there, so clean that all off, get it nice down to good clean metal. And then what I'll do is I'll take that same it's a red Rolock, but red Scotch-Brite effectively, and I will eventually use that on the roof itself. Just kind of rough it up and get it to a point where it's not super rough, but just touch it up a little bit, just so that there's a good amount of bite for the panel bond on both the metal and the roof. And just do my best to get a solid connection. And the roof's going on. You can briefly see it there, the Annihilator race. God, I love that. And the thing is, I didn't actually look inside the car and look up at that until like way later, and I was like, oh my god, this looks so freaking good. I'm so happy with that. But yeah, so what I'm going to do now is put all the Clecos back in and then drill out the holes for the new Clecos. if this was someone else's car while I was drilling these Clecos, I absolutely would have put a block of wood or metal or something between the windshield frame and the cage, because the drill bit goes through and I tagged the cage. It's just my car, so I don't care. I'm fine with that. I can just touch it up a little bit. But yeah, as I say, if this was not my car, I would 100% do something on the back to prevent the drill bit from hitting that. You know, I would probably put like a cloth and or a towel and then a piece of metal, just so that the piece of metal doesn't scratch the cage, and then the cloth would be soft. So don't do what I do. Have a little bit more care. And so now that I put all those Clecos back in, drill the new ones, it's time to take them all right back out. Right, so I'm using a wax and degreaser on the bare metal around the roof. I'm doing that because I want to remove any impurities and give the panel bond its best chance to stick to stick directly to the metal. So I never claim to be a smart man, but I can generally figure stuff out. So as I grab the panel bond here, I unscrew this cap and, take these plungers out. And then I put the end of the tube on, put it in, and it's like, go ahead and squeeze this, and the tube just comes right off. I'm just kind of like, what the fuck is going on? This doesn't make any sense. So you'll see here in a second, I'm trying to just hold it on, and that's not fucking working because, there's a lot of pressure coming out of there. So for me to hold that on, that's just wrong. And then I realized, oh, Ben, you dumb fuck. You got to screw that cap back on, and that'll hold the, the spout onto the gun while you're squeezing this. So it's just like, oh, you fucking moron. But in any case, you can see I'm just fairly liberally putting this panel bond onto the roof, trying my best to get it, pretty close to the outside edge. Maybe not right at the edge, inboard, maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. That way, once I put it onto the car, it'll kind of flatten out and squish out to the edge. And then in some of the corners, I just add a bunch more all over it. And then I'll do the same thing on the car. Man, I truly wish that the camera did any justice to A, how good that the Annihilator Racing looks on that roof, and B, the metal flake in the roof. The camera just is insulting to it. It looks so much better in person. That is something I'm actually super thrilled about, and just so happy with how it came out. Now that the roof's back on, time to put all those clecos and all those clamps back on. All right, now that the roof's back on, we are back to electrical. So just cleaning up some of the mess, some of the electrical tape. And then we are going to get back to making some new harnesses. So I think the first harness that I'm going to make is my switch panel. Now, my switch panel is actually probably okay. And the reason why I say it's probably okay is because, you know, all the wires were, I think I ran 16 gauge or maybe 14 gauge up to it. But the reality is I don't need wires that are that big going up to the switch panel. The switch panel literally just triggers inputs for relays. So I can actually run those as 22 gauge because it's literally just passing 12 volts through and triggering relays, which will actually power the devices. And then I'm going to also run just a few inputs towards the ECU, so that way if I need to run inputs, like if I need or want to run inputs for anything, any reason, I can. You know, one of the things that I do is after I've done my burnout, I flip a switch, and then when I hold my line lock, it activates my two-step. So that's one of the switches that I'm going to have off my switch panel, but I also have, you know, a switch for turning on my water pump, my 2 fans, my fuel pump, and then I'll probably throw a couple of spares in there just in case I need, you know, inputs for anything. I'll have it. It'll be there. Go to the ECU and, you know, I could trigger an output or whatever the case may be. So that's the first harness I'm going to do, and, you know, in order to build that, I got to undo all of the tape on the old harness. Right now I'm actually pulling out the old speaker wires and 2 of the RCAs. My original thought was like, oh, I'll run an amp and that'll power speakers in the doors and in the back. And then I was kind of like, if I put speakers in this, I'm just putting 2 speakers in the door. I don't need an amp to run them. I can just run them straight off of the deck. I'm not going for anything crazy here, but I will leave the remote and a set of RCAs, so in case I want to put a sub in this thing, I wouldn't have the sub in while I'm racing. It would just be for cruising on the street, because I'd have to take the sub out pretty much every time I'm racing, although I guess I could bolt it into the car permanently, but we'll see about that. So I'll leave the RCA and the remote wire for an amp for that, just for now, just cuz. Pull out the speaker wires, but yeah, so I'm going to work on pulling out the switch panel harness now. There was also a ground wire that was in there that I'd cut, so I can, you know, remove some old wires, and then I will go ahead and I will rebuild that harness out of 22 gauge, because that's all I need. So I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with the engine harness, and that is, twisting all the wires together. I'll loosely throw the, what's the word? The heat shrink and the wire loom on it. Just to make sure that everything pins out great before I finalize it. All right, now that the switch panel harness is done, obviously it's not terminated, but it's in the car. It's got enough wire. I'm going to start working on the wires that are going to go to my new door locks. So previously I had shaved door handles, and I am switching from the shaved door handles to doors with proper exterior handles. And the reason why I am switching is door poppers are terrible for racing. So you have to have handles on the outside so that, you know, in the event of a crash, people can get to you. And I didn't like how I had to set it up on the old doors. So getting rid of those, they were rusted out on the bottom anyways. So what this module is this just a lock unlock module. So it's a solenoid where you hit the lock button, it moves, you hit the unlock button, it moves. And that will mean that I can remotely unlock and lock the car. So I'm not planning on having like a key for the outside to lock and unlock it. It'll only be remote. And then if the battery dies or the remote dies, I could crawl through the hatch if I had to. That sucks with the seats and the bars and stuff. But if I have to, that's what I would do to get into the car. So yeah, with that, well, I mean, if the battery dies, my battery is in the rear of the car anyways, so I could get at it, just, you know, throw a jumper on there, and then, you know, my key fob would work. Yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm just going through because I want to do as I always do. I'm going to replace all of the wires that came with the kit. I'm going to replace them with my own wires, so I need to figure out what terminals I need to go into this connector. So I'm going to have to do some research and figure out what connector this is, what terminals go with it, and that sort of thing. So that being said, I did that off screen, but I'm just going to get into building this harness. There's 4 or 5 wires that go to the primary door, and then 2 wires that are going to go to the other door. So I'll build that harness out, and then I'm also going to, it also has a trunk hatch release. So right now, every time I want to put gas in the car, I got to get out, take my keys with me, use the keys, open the hatch. But with the hatch release, I should be able to just use that to open the hatch. So that'll be great. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and build that harness, same as I did all the other ones. Now that the door module harness is done, I am moving on over to CAN bus. So I'm going to have a couple of CAN bus devices in the car. My plan is to have a 3.5 inch Holley screen kind of in the dash in the center console. There's some things that I want to see on there that the gauges on my dash I don't have. Like I'm going to have EGTs for all the cylinders, so it'd be nice to have a screen for EGTs for, you know, when you're cruising down the road, you can see if you got a dead hole or anything like that. As well, sometimes it's actually nicer to have AFR on there, because the AFR on my gauges, they're analog, they respond a little slower than I'd like. So I think just having the 3.5 inch screen for some of those things would probably be a good idea. So I'm going to run the wire from the ECU and from my fuse box, because to run the CAN bus device, you need CAN high, CAN low, power, and ground. And that is something that, as I was researching, wasn't super clear to me. The Dominator just has a connector for CAN high and CAN low. I can't just use that as is. I actually need to supply power and ground as well. So this harness is 4 wires: CAN high, CAN low, power, and ground. So I'm just going to run it. I'm going to put extra in the line because, as I said, the first device is going to go behind the center console, which is where my radio goes. And then it's just going to daisy chain up into the EGT module. So that should actually, should be. It's going to be a straight run, and I'll just chop it in the middle, put a couple of connectors, and away we go. So I need some 3/16 loom for this harness. It's the smallest loom I have. And as you can see, this loom is a freaking mess. What would have ended up happening is when I opened the box, I would have grabbed the wrong end, started pulling it. It would have gotten all tied. I would have just kept on pulling it and not really dealing with it. So now I'm like, hey, screw this. I'm taking 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to deal with this, make it so that I can cleanly pull the loom out of this box. It's just going to make my life a lot easier in the future. All right, well, folks, with finishing off this last harness, that is all the time that we have for this week's video. So as always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing. We'll see you in the next one.